안녕하세요. Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. The last impression video I made about the US has got a lot of views, and if you're from that video, welcome back to another video. If you haven't seen the last video, 10 weird impressions about the US coming from a Korean, please go watch it after this video. Anyways, one of the most commented comments in the last video was America is so huge and diverse that it cannot be generalized by just experience in California, LA, or Vegas. New York City, for example, is very different in particular. Of course, I knew that, but anyways, I decided to go to NYC and really see what was so different. This is a video about the impressions I got while visiting New York City for 10 plus days. I've been to most of the areas. I really did hustle to get around. Now, don't get offended before you watch the whole video. I have a very positive conclusion waiting, despite many weird impressions I got. The things I'm about to say is in the viewpoint of a Korean, what I thought was interesting or unusual. So before I go into the real weird impressions, this is my first impression. I thought New York is very unpleasant at first sight. So hear me out until the end of this video. Everywhere was under construction. You had to walk under scaffolds. Construction workers were everywhere, and the sound of the drills. The streets were very dirty, and there's like this certain stink that follows you around the certain streets. And the jaywalking, honking, traffic jams, the skyscrapers that are surrounding you and kind of like suffocates you with those close distances. You can't really see the sun. So I'll be totally honest, these were my first impressions about New York City. Wow, this place is pretty chaotic. Number 2, the subway infrastructure and system isn't that good. It's not top notch. It was summer and I couldn't believe there wasn't air conditioning within the subway stations or the platforms. And the stairs were all kind of dirty. Also, the subway didn't have a set schedule. In Korea, we have like apps that show when the subway is gonna arrive, and it is exactly the same every day on schedule without delay. But in New York City, there was no such thing. On the weekend, for example, I was on line 7, and especially line 7 was under construction that I had to take detours and different routes, making me late to appointments. Although the subway being 24/7 was quite impressive. And number 3, there were a lot of homeless people on the streets. And it was weird because it seemed just so natural. Sometimes I could see them yelling or fighting each other because of like district issues, territory issues. I don't know the reason to why I see so many homeless people, but New Yorkers weren't bothered. And that was weird because in populated Asian countries and cities, we don't see that much homeless people on the streets. Number 4, I could feel the gap between the rich and poor very vividly in New York City. There were certain areas or districts that were heavily focused with just a particular ethnicity. And sadly, it was just so vivid when the neighborhood's infrastructure or general vibes just got relatively poor than the richer areas. The people who were dwelling there or were on the streets also changed as well. And this might be irrelevant, but when I was in a Broadway musical or like a rooftop pool bar or party or anywhere fancy, I was amazed at how high the percentage was concentrated of white people. This was very weird to me as a Korean or Asian because Asian countries are not that multicultural or multinational, so we can't really distinguish the poor areas and rich areas with ethnicity. And number 5, this was so weird to me, but it was so hard to find a public restroom. No restrooms in the subway at all, even in buildings or malls. They do have restrooms, but you have to go all the way down a long hall and it's hidden somewhere with a small restroom sign. And outside of Manhattan, it's almost impossible to find a public restroom without going into a small store or house. I have to admit that I had some very dangerous moments when I desperately needed a restroom. I don't even want to complain about anything else, but I just thought it was weird that there were no restrooms at subways or parks, like those public areas. Whereas in Korea, we have pretty good restrooms at public areas. So I was just wondering how New Yorkers solve their needs when they were in need for a restroom. Number 6, everything is so expensive. From the subway cost, which is $2.75 per ride, to house rents that go from $1,200 to $2,000 or even more for a single room. All the friends I met were living in single rooms and they paid that amount of rent. The accommodation prices were really high, which made me hard to stay there for a long time, for more than 10 plus days. The food from restaurants were very expensive. For example, eating at a decent restaurant, 2 people, me and my friend, it would cost nearly 40 to 50 bucks after tax and tip. And also I heard an interesting story that workers actually got taxed triple by the state, city, and federally, so their income would shrink to almost half after like taxes. So I guess everything about New York is just expensive, maybe except the dollar pizzas. Number 7, there were flags everywhere. Every place I went, there were flags. The Madison Square Garden, Wall Street, Times Square, and even the residence areas all had flags on their porches. All the museums, libraries, parks, whatever. I just thought to myself, probably Americans are very proud of their own country, which is a good thing, but it was kind of weird seeing flags all over the place. Number 8, around the residence areas, there were a lot of laundromats. In Korea, even the smallest houses usually have their own laundry machines, so we don't have those kind of things. And I was genuinely curious whether a lot of people just didn't have laundry machines, whether the laundry machines are expensive to maintain or whatever. Let me know why in the comments. And number 9, this may not be just about New York. I saw a lot of cleavage and no bras. Because it was hot, many people had light clothes on, but the difference with Korea is that we don't expose our bodies. We don't show that much skin. But in New York City, I could see people wearing tank tops, sleeveless shirts that show a lot of skin. And also, I'll be totally honest, I couldn't help not noticing that many people went around braless. Not in Manhattan, but other areas like Brooklyn or Queens. So I guess people really don't care about revealing skin than Asian countries. Number 10, everyone doesn't give a fuck what others are doing. In my previous video, based on observations in LA or the West Coast, people started random talks between strangers on the bus. Uber drivers talked to me until I got off to the destination point. But in New York, the subway is silent unless people have friends with them. Lyft and Uber drivers just say, "Oh, are you David?" I say yes, and then silent until I get off the drop-off point. And also, people tend to be less apologetic, kind of more cool about things. For example, during rush hour in the subway, I was bumped by so many people and they didn't care. I mean, I was fine because I'm Korean and that happens all the time, but that was not the case in West Coast. I guess people in New York are just too busy or just like to mind their own business. One time I kind of lost my balance on the subway and kind of stepped on somebody's foot, and I was just about to say sorry, and I looked at his eyes and he was just like, nothing happened. I guess people in New York are just too busy or like to mind their own business. Anyways, those were some weird impressions I got when I was in New York City, but at the end I got to conclude that it was those weirdnesses that made New York City special, different from anywhere else. The city had so much to offer: old and new buildings, busy people, but chill hip cafes sometimes, restaurants and piers, a huge park in the middle of Manhattan, but a few blocks away, it stinks on the streets. And there's like jam-packed subways that never come in time, but people trying to walk faster maybe because of that. Oh, and I noticed that there's not as much obesity in New York than other places, probably because they walk around so much. And at the same time, I respect the hustle I observed, how people work hard to achieve their dreams, whether it's fashion, finance, arts, tech, or whatever. They have to pay enormous rents and bills to just live there. Anyways, I realized that NYC really doesn't sleep and has literally everything that a human would desire in an urban lifestyle. I don't know if I personally prefer that hectic life, but it's definitely attractive in its own way.